11 Taylor Swift albums and a potential 12th on the way by the end of the year, but which one reigns supreme? Am I more of a folklore lover or am I more of a Taylor Swift pop lover with records like 1989 and Reputation? It's been a while since I've checked in on my Taylor Swift album rank, and I actually have never gone in depth on it. So today on the Pop Pod, I am going to talk about all of Taylor Swift's 11 studio albums, and I'm going to rank them from worst to best. I am Sam, also known as Pop Sam Cam, and welcome to the Pop Pod. If you're new here, some housekeeping straight up. I would love if you would follow the podcast, follow, subscribe, whatever they call it, where you're listening to it. And also, if you feel like rating it 5 stars, if you enjoy what you're hearing, I would love that as well. No pressure. There's also a Discord, which I'll drop down below, the link in the description for the podcast. You can come and join that and talk to other people who listen to the podcast about pop music on the daily. I'm excited to get into this episode. First up, I just want to say apologies for there not being a bop or flop last Friday. Jono is currently away and I have another guest stepping in for it, but the Ethel Cain album proved to be a lot denser. Well, I was going to say than I thought, but I definitely saw it being dense. So we're just taking a couple days to listen to it. We will be recording it and it will be out this week. Of course, we'll also do the bop or flop on Friday because I have a feeling there's going to be a few big releases out there. But for now, it's all about Taylor Swift. At the time of recording this, they have just teased, well, Taylor Nation has potentially teased the 12th Taylor Swift record. We are not sure exactly what's going on, but she also could be appearing on her boyfriend Travis Kelce's podcast this week as well. There's potentially a lot going on, and I actually already had this episode planned, so it's working out perfectly for me. So thank you, Taylor, for that. I'm excited to get into this. There's 11 Taylor Swift albums. They are varied in sound. It stretches well over a decade's worth of material. We've gotten to revisit a lot of them lately with the Taylor's versions of them. But I feel like it's cool to do it now, knowing that she owns all of them outright. It's also nice to know in some kind of way that there's no re-recording project going on right now, because I almost felt with that and the Eras tour that she couldn't totally leave behind her past and go into the future. And I feel like that's what's going to be really important for this forthcoming record, is that she's just given like a blank space, excuse the pun, to do whatever she wants without Reputation TV or Debut TV hanging over her head. That could still come, but I hope that she does it in a period where she's not promoting new work. So let's get into it. In number 11, perhaps unsurprisingly, if you've ever followed me, it is Debut.
When you think Tim McGraw, I hope you think my favorite song, the one we dance to all night long, the moon like a spotlight on the lake.
I think that this is a promising record. I think that it showed us what Taylor Swift could potentially be. It showed to me that she had a really good ability to mix pop hooks with storytelling and more country-driven production. And I think the storytelling is the most important part of this album because it's incredibly vivid. For an artist who is still a teenager, to hear a song like Tim McGraw that tells that story so beautifully, or our song that tells that story with such imagery, like you can almost imagine everything that's going on through this record, I think that it showed exceptional promise for her. I think that it's no accident that she left this one until potentially last to re-record, because it is definitely the one that's the most different to anything that she's done since, but it does lay the groundwork for what's to come for Taylor Swift. I can't say that this is an album I go back to very often. I think that it's juvenile in a way, and I think that's almost by design. Obviously, she was basically a kid when she wrote this, so you cannot blame her for that. But her songwriting has gotten so much more mature throughout the whole process that I just struggle to evaluate this one in the lineage of her other albums. And I certainly don't think it's bad. I actually don't think any record that I'm going to talk about today is particularly bad, but this is the one for me that I just never revisit. It doesn't scratch anything for me. So it's an easy decision to put this into number 11. It actually gets a little bit harder when I get to number 10 because there was kind of two records I was tossing up between. The bottom three of Taylor Swift records is pretty obvious for me. But in 10, I've had to go with Midnights.
Me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me. At tea time, everybody agrees.
I have a couple of reasons for this. The first one being that I think that by reevaluating all her past work, she allowed the past to really inform some of her present material. And I think that's never truer than on Midnights, which begins to feel a lot like 1989 in a way, but a lot like a lot of different things as well. The Jack Antonoff production is strikingly similar to a bunch of other things that she's done. Midnights just to me didn't feel fresh. And I guess it was difficult to look at this in the moment because obviously it came during this Imperial era for Taylor Swift and then lent into the Eras tour as well. And so it was easy to get caught up in this and think that this was the biggest album since Sliced Bread. And I guess in many ways it was. Anti-Hero was a massive hit. But going back on it now, for me, it feels slight and it doesn't feel like it advanced anything for her. Like it just feels like it's kind of caught a little bit in a rut. And I think when we hear the 1989 Vault tracks, we kind of start to understand that a little bit more, that the sound just wasn't developing to where I wanted it to be. And I think in my mind, I thought this album could go one of two ways and it went neither, which was I thought that she could come out of Evermore and Folklore and really want to do something splashy and pop. And it almost is that in terms of like, I think Anti-Hero has a huge pop hook. I think Bejeweled and Karma obviously lean quite pop. But I also thought the other thing that she could do is go quite shoegazy and quite 90s in kind of a mirrorball sense. And she also does that kind of on some tracks as well, particularly on the 3 a.m. version of this. But she never just quite leans far enough into one way. And I just find the production at points in this quite dull. Like I find the drums on some of the songs in particular just really holding the songs back from being something more. Like Karma and Bejeweled, for example, could be these really like flashy, really shiny pop songs, and instead they just get bogged down in being almost a retread of, I guess, some of the material that she was giving to Lover. So I just don't go back to this one very often, but it does, I will say, and let me just pull up the track list, it does have some of my absolute highlights from her. I still go back to Midnight Rain and listen to that. I think that that's an incredible song. Man, looking at it now, I don't go back to that many. I go back to Snow on the Beach, the more Lana version, because I guess I like hearing these two together. But apart from that, I don't know. The only word that comes up when I think about this album is just constantly slight. And I wanted it to be more than that in this moment. I do think that some of the songs were actually bolstered up on the Eras tour and stood up quite well, particularly a moment like Mastermind, I think sounded beautiful in that kind of setting. But on record, there's just something a little too dull about it, which is why it lands in number 10. For me, in number 9, I'm going to go with her second album, Fearless.
If you could see that I'm the one who understands you, been here all along, so why can't you see? You belong with me. You belong with me.
Basically for many of the same reasons that Debut ends so low down, which is that I just don't know if I gravitate personally myself to some of her more juvenile songwriting. And I think in this moment in her career, she's kind of really caught in fairy tales and kind of in bringing those fairy tales to life in sort of a modern American high school setting, which to me, it like leans into some cliches that I don't love when it comes to her songwriting. And this is why a song like Love Story has never quite clicked for me. It's because of that reason. I think this record shines when she goes into the funnest parts of her on a song like You Belong With Me, which I think is obviously a pop classic, and that starts to build what Taylor Swift will later kind of shine doing on a record like 1989, which is kind of twisting the narrative of herself and bringing some kind of novelty to it, but also making this big boisterous pop song as well. I think that that's really, You Belong With Me is kind of the centerpiece of this record in every single way. And it's just not as memorable for me because of the reasons that I just mentioned. And I think it's probably a personal thing. Like, I think if you've grown up with this record, you've probably got a connection to it that I don't. But I really like when she starts to flash some more maturity. And I think that she does that quite well on the next record, Speak Now. And I think she takes a giant leap on that record into something different. And then from there on, like, I really enjoy her songwriting. But here I just feel like, I don't know, it's almost like we're opening a children's book at some points. I do think that her more earnest songwriting on this is the type that shines more. Like Fearless and 15 right in the middle of the record, I think are really, really good. I think 15 particularly is extremely heartfelt and kind of like peels back a layer to her that we didn't quite get to hear on debut, which I think is really impressive. I like how it retains the country sensibilities on this album, but it's not beholden to it. And it does feel like she's trying to stretch herself and move further into that pop direction, more into that complete Taylor Swift sound that I think totally comes to life on Red. But there's just too many moments on this where I'm kind of just like, don't love, Come In With The Rain, Superstar, Untouchable, just moments like that just feel a little bit too teenage for me. And it's funny to criticize an album that she literally wrote as a teenager for being too teenage. I mean, I'm happy that she made this album that she did when she did, but we're talking about an artist who's been so good at developing and so good at, with each era, like showing a new part of herself. And I think I really appreciate that advancement. And because of that, it's difficult for me to look back on these first two albums and really appreciate what she was doing, because I do think that she's gotten so much better since. So I don't go back to this one too much. And that kind of rounds out my bottom three and the albums that I potentially don't have as much to say about, whereas you're really going to hear me yap for the next ones because they're some of my favorites. And in number 8 is one I sweat over this decision so much, because this is an album that when I think of it, I kind of think immediately top 4, but when I really boiled it down, there are just too many moments that don't land amongst the moments that I think land exceptionally. So in number 8, I'm putting Lover. Lover, I have argued with people about being a better record than Reputation. And I think that if you chip away at this album, there is a better record than Reputation in here. But it's just the most bloated Taylor Swift project. And it was the most bloated Taylor Swift project until she gave us the anthology on top of the Tortured Poets department. But it felt like this was the only period in her career where she was throwing everything at the wall and hoping that something stuck, because she could feel her footing for the first time kind of not quite sticking. And that was a scary position to be in, because this is somebody who'd been the biggest pop star in the world for almost a decade and had just continued to go from strength to strength. But I think with Reputation, we started to see, even though the Reputation World Tour did exceptionally well, the album sold exceptionally well, she didn't quite have the hits that she'd had on her previous records. And I feel like they started to panic a little bit. And I think that's why you start to see Me with Brendan Urie. Obviously, Panic at the Disco were having a major moment at that point with High Hopes. And then you get You Need to Calm Down. She teams up with Joel Little, who'd obviously worked with Lorde on Pure Heroin. And I just don't think they brought out the best in each other. Those two singles in particular, to me, are ones that just really reek of trying to get a hit. And there's a desperation that I really don't like. And I remember receiving the album Lover and thinking like, this is really going to be difficult to listen to. The first track, I Forgot That You Existed, confirms that. I remember thinking like, man, this is going to be no good. And then Cruel Summer hits and everything changes. Cruel Summer is a game changer for her career in terms of how she writes songs and the kind of like grunt that she can put into it. I think that Cruel Summer informs the next 6 years of her songwriting because it is just that good. It has a toughness to it, but it also has the slickness of 1989. It also has the darkness of Reputation. I think that her and Jack Antonoff's partnership shines so well on this. I think that also she really figures out that what fans want from her is a really good bridge. And she's like, you know what? I'll give you my absolute best. St. Vincent in the mix as well just totally works. It is a perfect pop song in every sense of the word. And it just totally threw me for six when I was listening to this album. And going back on it, it is those songs that are in the Cruel Summer lane that are absolutely phenomenal. I mean, Death by a Thousand Cuts to me is a bridge that I could listen to. She could add another 8 minutes onto that bridge and I would listen to every single second of it. I think that Cornelia Street as well fits with them and is a great song. Gosh, there's just so many good ones. Miss Americana and the Heartbreak Prince ends up being like a perfect opener for the Eras tour. And then I think further down, you get some of her more interesting songs. False God, for example, introduces a sexiness to her work that she'd played with on Reputation, but I think successfully pulls it off on this. And I remember the SNL performance where she's just like wearing that blazer and the saxophone is in. And I think this is someone who has kind of been painted as being a bit clumsy for her entire career. And here she is suddenly looking cool. And I feel like False God sets kind of a blueprint for this mode of Taylor Swift that she explores further on other albums, particularly on a song like Guilty as Sin from the Tortured Poets department. I also think that some of her most vulnerable songwriting is here. Obviously, Soon You'll Get Better is really, really stripped back and honestly quite difficult to listen to for me. Afterglow 2, I feel like is beautifully written. And then the closer as well, Daylight, has this like shining optimism to it, which is generally the heart of Lover. It's a playful album. It's a loved up album. It's a bright album. It's kaleidoscopic in many ways. And I feel like when she really leans into that, but not too far, that's when Lover is at its best. And it's when she leans too far that things go awry, because while the songs I mentioned rank in some of my favorite Taylor Swift songs of all time, there are a few missteps on this record. Like, I Forgot That You Existed, I've already mentioned. London Boy, I think, tries to be fun and ends up just being a little bit cringy. You Need to Calm Down, as I mentioned. Me, as I mentioned, obviously. Paper Rings I personally like, but it really does toe the line between being cringe and cool. And then also The Man, I think, too, is a little too on the nose, even though the sentiment, I think, is an incredibly important one for Taylor Swift and one that obviously becomes even more important post-Lover. The title track is brilliant in my opinion. I think that it's really, really successful in just being like a straight up kind of like traditional ballad in a way that Taylor Swift hasn't really done before. It just really works for me. So I'm constantly caught between this album is amazing and this album is terrible. And I think the version of this album that's amazing is my version of the album. And I think my version of the album has Cruel Summer, it has Lover, it has The Archer, it has I Think He Knows, it has Miss Americana, has Paper Rings, Cornelia Street, Death by a Thousand Cuts, and then it has False God, Afterglow, and Daylight. And the other ones, I've almost mentioned most of the albums, but the other ones are like really bad. It's Nice to Have a Friend, one of the worst songs that she's ever written. It's almost there, and there are so many good moments on this album. And I feel like she channels that and puts it into the albums that come directly after this, which are some of her best. I hate to do this to Lover, but it is landing in number 8. This was also a really difficult decision for me, but in number 7, I put the Tortured Poets department.
And for a fortnight there we were, forever running to you. Sometimes ask about the weather. Now you're in my backyard. Turn into good neighbors. Your wife waters flowers. I wanna kill her.
This is an album that I've liked more and more as I've continued to explore it. And I think the reason that it kind of didn't get the appraisal that it deserves straight up is just because we were at the peak of oversaturation by that point. The previous year, we'd had the Speak Now and 1989 re-releases. She was also still going on with the Eras tour. And then in the midst of that, we got this album that she then added the anthology to, and it was just so much Taylor Swift material. And it was starting to become hard to tell the difference. But having said that, post all the Eras tour ending and stuff, I feel like I've been able to get even more of an appreciation for this album. And I want to talk about the thing that I think this album does the best. And it's that I think she's always been self-aware in a way. I think that a song like Blank Space shows that she's self-aware. But this is peeling back a layer that we just hadn't seen before. Obviously, she's quite in depth with the way that she talks about her relationship with Maddie Healy. And this is somebody who has, at the core of her career, has been able to write about relationships with 100% clarity. But this one just goes even further. I mean, The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived and LOML, just some of the most piercing songwriting that she's ever given us. And I feel like she was revealing a vulnerability that we just had not seen before. Like, it's, I guess if you take Folklore and Evermore as not being fictional pieces of work, we have had it. But if you are considering them to be fictional, then this is the most revealing Taylor Swift album that she's ever released. I also find it incredibly revealing for the way that she talks about her fans and the backlash she received from them for the relationship on songs like But Daddy, I Love Him and Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. It's just so fascinating to hear Taylor Swift be so kind of unbusinesslike for the first time in her career. And maybe that's the best way to describe this album, is that it's unbusinesslike. There's not a single that really shines through. She doesn't overly promote it. It's some of the stuff she's saying is so off the cuff. It's unbelievable. It's probably not released at the right time. Like all these things. And that comes to be what I like about this album so much, that it does go so rogue, because it reveals an unpolished Taylor that I think is so fascinating to watch. That's not to say that I think this whole album works. I've often described Fortnight as being morose. I honestly cannot stand it. I think that a song like Fresh Out the Slammer just kind of plods along a little too much. And I will say I'm only talking about the standard edition of the album, because once we add the anthology, this is dropping back a couple places. I Can Fix Him, No Really I Can as well, just like too similar maybe to Fresh Out of the Slammer, and just feels like it draws this album out a little bit. But like Lover, with a little bit of editing, this has some of her best work. But Daddy, I Love Him is absolutely like thunderous in a way that I haven't heard her since like Red. So Long London just really like plays with my emotions. That pulsating beat is hit straight away, and I love the way that she treats the melody on that song with this kind of finesse that's not really brazen and in your face. I think that My Boy Only Breaks His Favorite Toys could have been a massive hit with the right production, but it's almost purposefully lo-fi. And then Guilty as Sin, like what a song, just so good. As I said, picking up from that sexiness of False God and just going straight into it. I think it's an incredible song. And then further down in the track list, when she gets really cutting on like The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived, I remember my jaw being on the floor when I heard the bridge to that the first time. So this is actually an album that I really, really like. I just feel like there's a couple moments that she could have cut, and it drags on for way too long, and that's not even talking about the anthology. I think if this had even been an 11-track record, it would have been an absolute slam dunk, but we know that's not really in Taylor's playbook. But an album that I think is shit on unfairly, and an album that I actually think is going to be treated quite kindly in hindsight, and I'm excited for that. But it does land in number 7 because the albums that come after this are like, you almost can't chop songs from them, I think. Maybe you can chop a couple songs from my number 6, which is Evermore.
The more that you say, the less I know. Wherever you stray, I follow. I'm begging for you to take my hand, wreck my plans. That's my man.
Evermore's an album that I have a soft spot for. It is the rogue sister of Folklore. I think Folklore feels like totally complete and feels like she kind of labored over it, even though I know that she didn't, because she kind of dropped it out of nowhere in the midst of the pandemic. But it definitely has a polish to it that Evermore just doesn't have. Like, Evermore feels like she was just in this moment of creative inspiration, and she was like, you know what, I'm not even going to overthink this or think about editing them too much. I'm just going to put it out. And that's kind of a vibe that I actually really like on this record. I think that it is really fun in some sense, and like also gets really deep in another sense. I like the presence of guitars on this record. I love the work that she does with Aaron Dessner on this, maybe even more than on Folklore. 'Tis the Damn Season is one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs of all time, and I love how stripped back and minimal it is. And actually, like, that run of Willow, Champagne Problems, probably not Gold Rush, but 'Tis the Damn Season, just so stripped back and so reliant on excellent storytelling and melody. And you can just tell that she's in this moment where the pen just won't stop writing because it's just coming off so easily at this point. I also think some of her most devastating songwriting, Tolerate It, just taps into such a vulnerable position. And I think she said that she was watching a lot of The Crown at this point, and was kind of inspired by Diana and Charles's relationship in the royal family. I don't totally believe that. I think there's more truth to these songs than she was letting on at the time, because we obviously know what happens with Joe following this. But I love that she can just do that kind of thing over a piano. I mean, the bridges are hitting once again on this album. But I also think that this album, by not overthinking things too much, allows some of the more contained, intimate moments to remain really contained and intimate, where I feel like she maybe would have tried to blow it out of the water with production on a record like Tortured Poets Department or even Folklore. And those moments to me, like Cowboy Like Me, I think is so beautiful and just so patient. And I also think that of Ivy, where this like beautiful chorus just emerges from nowhere. And I think it's so, so nice. It fits the time that it was released in so well. Honestly, really confounding time to think about now, but I remember this album just feeling totally like what it was, in that it was matching these intimate, contained moments that we were obviously having by being in lockdown, but also just the absolute confusion and just like trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. And she emulates that feeling on a song like Closure, where she borrows a lot from the Nationals playbook in terms of those like skittering drums. It makes sense to me, so we're going to use it. Yeah, I love those kind of moments on the record. Speaking of the National, I also love when she teams up with them on Coney Island. I know that song like is either a love or hate for many people, but I personally love it. I think that Evermore has a lot to celebrate about it. I also think that there are a couple songs on here that for me just don't quite stick the landing. Happiness, I get what she's trying to do, but for me, it just kind of comes off as boring. I don't think the title track needed to be there, like given that what her and Bon Iver had already done on Folklore, which I think was one of the highlights from that record. This one kind of dulls that impact. It just does feel slight compared to Folklore. Folklore feels like a masterpiece, and this at times feels like an afterthought, but in the right day, I will really enjoy that, and I will stick up for Evermore as long as I live. So that is the one that is landing in number 6 for me. In number 5, I'm going with Reputation.
Oh, look what you made me do. Look what you made me do. Look what you just made me do. Look what you just made me. Ooh.
This is an interesting record to think about because I remember at the time there was obviously such a Kanye versus Taylor Swift thing going on. I was on the side of Kanye West because I was a massive Kanye fan. History has not been kind to that decision, and I of course regret it now, and I was wrong. But because of that, the arrival of this record was somewhat sullied for me, and this is an album that I've had to go back and learn to appreciate. At the time, I thought that there was something really try hard about it. And the reason that I thought that is because obviously hip hop is massive at the point that she releases this album. And trap beats in particular are really huge. And when I heard a song like Endgame, I was like, oh, why is she trying to do this when she's just proved to herself that she is just perfect at writing pop songs on 1989? And because of that, I kind of binged this album and didn't think about it for a long time. Going back, what I thought was this really in-your-face kind of like, don't blame me, I'm the victim sort of album. It's not like that at all. And there's a heart to this record that I really, really enjoy. And that is that this record is essentially about, and I've spoken about this quite a lot, but about finding romance in a period where you feel like you've hit rock bottom, where you feel like nobody is listening to you and nobody is on your side. And within that, she's found this partnership to kind of create this own world that manages to make her happy at a time when she is just not happy at all. And I think she spells it out perfectly on a song like Call It What You Want, where she sings at the start, like, my castle crumbled overnight, I brought a knife to a gunfight. He took the crown, but it's all right. And then it's my baby's fit like a jet stream. I think that's it. But it goes into this romantic sense after she's just talking about how she literally has nobody left on her side. This darkness becomes light. And I think that that is such an interesting juxtaposition to explore. And I think that that juxtaposition totally makes Reputation. I love how she puts up the toughness that she has on songs like I Did Something Bad with the vulnerability that she has on songs like New Year's Day, King of My Heart, Getaway Car. That is the real joy of this, even Delicate, I guess. And that's a side to this album that I think gets overlooked because of how powerful the visuals were. Everything from the music videos to the tour and the snake of it all as well, I think maybe mispromoted this in some kind of way. I also think this is where Jack Antonoff and Taylor Swift's partnership begins to really shine. Like, Getaway Car, are you kidding me? Like, that is a perfect pop song. And it's all about those pounding drums, those anthemic vocals, and the bridge. Like, they just became absolute masters at writing a bridge throughout this period. And I feel like this is where she starts to learn that maybe the Max Martin stuff is not her biggest strength, and maybe she should go in the Jack Antonoff path, down the Jack Antonoff path. And I know that people will argue against that, but I personally think that it was the right thing to do. And there are so many moments on this where this partnership just absolutely shines. I will say there are a couple of missteps on this, like So It Goes doesn't totally work for me. Gorgeous, I actually really like the melody of it, but I do find it to be a little bit of like a blank space retread in terms of the production, and it does it less successfully. I've always felt that Don't Blame Me was kind of just Hosier's Take Me to Church redone, but I have come to like it over time. And this is why we can't have nice things is by design on the nose, but catch me in the right mood and I might actually like it. That said, all of that is outweighed by the fact that this just has so many good songs on it. Delicate, one of her best singles. Call It What You Want, my absolute favorite. Dress, again in that mode of like False God and Guilty as Sin. So cool. King of My Heart, Dancing with My Hands Tied. As a pop writer, she was on fire during this record. The melodies are so tight across this whole album. So that's why it lands in number 5 for me. Number 4, I'm going with Speak Now.
Do you remember we were sitting there by the water? You put your arm around me for the first time. You made a rebel of a careless man's careful daughter. You are the best thing that's ever been mine.
This is another record that I had to go back to totally appreciate when I was able. I guess there was a moment around Lover when I enjoyed that so much that I thought that I need to go back and give every single album another chance. And Speak Now was one of the ones that really shone during that time for me. This is an album that she wrote. I mean, it's just so striking to me that on Fearless, she has her biggest hit, her biggest hits, You Belong With Me, and Love Story. And then instead of just teaming up with bigger producers and going bigger, 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 she experiences heartache. She decides to kind of go inward and make this record that she entirely self-writes and still manages, I don't know if she manages to make it a massive commercial hit. It's obviously a big commercial hit, but in terms of actual massive songs from this record, there aren't as many as her others. But this is such a display of her artistry and such a leap forward in terms of her songwriting that I honestly just find it so compelling. Many of these songs are like hovering around or over 5 minutes. There are so many epics on this. I think that Dear John like lays the footwork for a song like All Too Well to exist. And I feel like she just really trusts her songwriting on this entire album. I mean, you have to if you're going to go it by yourself. It perhaps leans into country even more than Fearless, but leans into the side of country that is really narrative driven. And I think that she just really shines in that space. And I think it's something that we see again on Folklore and Evermore, like many years after this album. But Speak Now really lays the foundations for that. There are so many songs on this album that I like. Mine, I think, is an excellent single and a like almost much cooler version than Love Story. Back to December, the songwriting on that is so good. But then you've got the more upbeat stuff that really works as well. Better Than Revenge, obviously her kind of turn at Paramore, but one that she does exceptionally well. Sparks Fly, I feel like is a perfect country track, and that chorus just absolutely soars. Mean addresses the haters in a way that is a little bit on the nose again, but I think if we're learning anything from going through all her albums, it's that she kind of excels when she leans sometimes into being a little bit on the nose, and I feel like her melody writing on that is really, really tight as well, which just works so well. But then you also get to learn how much of an incredible storyteller she is, and she takes on storytelling with a lot more maturity on this album than she does on Fearless. And I think that begins to shine on a song like Speak Now, where she just so vividly recounts this story of kind of bursting into the church and stopping everything. And also Enchanted as well, which is almost like a Disney song just done with so much more maturity for one, and also like gravity. Like it just has such a weight to this song, and I feel like we see that on the Eras tour, where she really gives it its own centerpiece moment, and probably the reason that it also ended up taking off so well on TikTok. But then I also think some of the like really dark moments on these, like almost depressive moments on this album, work well as well. Haunted and Innocent like almost give you chills, that they just capture this darkness so incredibly well, and in a way that we'd never heard Taylor Swift go into before. And I think that's a product of the age that she was. But I also feel like she would have faced a lot of kickback for being too melodramatic. And it's something that we've seen like Olivia Rodrigo kind of course correct for a lot of artists, in being like, of course I'm melodramatic. Like I'm a teenage girl and I'm like living through all these emotions. But Taylor Swift was really putting them all out to bear on this record. I just think it is such a heavy album to listen to. It's a lot to get through. It's a very long album, but she keeps you on the edge of your seat with every moment. And I feel like it's a real outlier in the Taylor Swift discography, in that like it feels like an album that totally just singularly comes from her, which is rare because obviously she starts to invite a lot of collaborators in, and she She finds the ones that she really gels with, and they kind of inform the sound a little bit. Obviously, she's always leading the way, but you can always hear when Jack Antonoff or Aaron Dessner or Max Martin is on a song, whereas this one feels so uniquely Taylor Swift, and I've just come to appreciate that so much. Let's move on to number 3, which was a really hard one for me to do as well, but I ended up going with, in number 3, 1989.
So it's gonna be forever, or it's gonna go down in flames. You can tell me when it's over, if the high was worth the pain.
Kind of pop Bible. 1, because it is a really good pop record. 2, because the stats don't lie. The amount of singles on this album is just absolutely stupid, and the amount of good singles, Shake It Off, Blank Space, Style, Wildest Dreams, Bad Blood, and New Romantics all becoming hits, is just crazy. And I really like that she went into the pop thing on her own terms. I feel like her and Max Martin and the Swedish like producers and songwriters that work on this works really well, in that they tapped into this 80s sound that kind of wasn't really being done in the mainstream at this time. And so it felt like she was moving into the pop lane in a really unique way, and in a way that still maintained what she'd done so successfully throughout her career, which was kind of address the press narratives about her in a really clever way. But I think she does it just so much better on this album. Like, Blank Space is just the perfect flip of the script, when everybody's criticizing her music for just being about ex-boyfriends and how many people does Taylor Swift date. And she's like, okay, let me play the character, and let me play it better than you could ever paint out for me. And that is a 10 out of 10 pop song, Blank Space. It's so good. And it's followed up by another 10 out of 10 single, which is Style, which is just so slick. And I think it sets the blueprint for work that a lot of pop stars do after this, in terms of that like synth pop 80s style. I think Ariana Grande does it. I think Justin Bieber does it as well. And like, they're the top tier ones, but literally so many new artists that I hear coming through now use this kind of sound as the blueprint. And that's 1989 in general. It's a blueprint record. It's a once in a lifetime record. It will probably for the rest of her career remain the album with the most hits, and deservedly so as well. And even when you step outside the hits on this album, there's still so much to latch onto. We obviously hear Jack and her team up for the first time on Out of the Woods, which I've used Thunderous before and like during this podcast, but you've got to use it for this song because it is just relentless the way that this song attacks you with those pounding drums. And I think that like she starts to do really good bridges on Speak Now, but she just takes it to the stratosphere on the bridge of Out of the Woods. Other songs that I think work really well on this is like I Wish You Would, Stay. Just so many good moments on this album, and probably the most major for her career of any Taylor Swift album. Just totally transformed it. In number 2, I've got Taylor Swift's Red.
I knew you were trouble when you walked in. So shame on me now. Flew me to places I've never been. Till you put me down.
Red is such an interesting album because it is caught in two different worlds. She's still holding on to the country of it all, but there's also the Max Martin introduction, and it feels like she's moving closer and closer into pop music. Obviously, most of the singles are pop. We Are Never Getting Back Together just makes a bold statement that I'm in the pop world. And then also you get I Knew You Were Trouble, and then 22 as well, just all very pop. But that's not the reason why I think that this album is so good. In fact, it's more of the like arena ready rock moments that I think propel this album into number 2 for me, particularly songs like State of Grace, Treacherous, Holy Ground. I think are just so good. And it's almost like Taylor Swift with her fist in the air, and the songwriting just becomes so anthemic and so bold and so just like muscular in a way. Like it's so successful. And an album like this really shouldn't work because it's not her most cohesive at all. In fact, there are so many different sounds that go in the pot. And the reason why it does work is because it's all so singular to Taylor Swift. I think that by Red that she has just like figured out exactly where her songwriting is most potent, and she knows exactly what sounds to put that into. And even when she's exploring with the pop sounds, I think that it works very well, bar 22, which is a song that I don't love, but I do love a song like I Knew You Were Trouble. I feel like anthemic, if you've seen the Eras tour, I think you would agree that anthemic is such a good way to describe Taylor Swift's music in general. And Red just has the best of it on there. I think that Red was such a like thrilling moment when she did the re-release, and that kind of told me everything, because it was, I think for me, it was the most exciting Taylor's version that she dropped. And I think it is because this album is just that good. Like, this is the moment that we saw what Taylor Swift could be. I think that Speak Now showed us the songwriter that Taylor Swift could be, but Red showed us exactly the kind of artist that she could be. And it is so exciting. And I haven't even talked about All Too Well, which remains to me her best song. I think her ability to talk about relationships with such vivid and such uncluttered storytelling, and I think that this is major in her becoming the biggest artist on earth, is that she is able to connect to so many people because there's a universality. I don't know if that's a word. There's a globalness. Is that a word? There's something really global about her songwriting, but also something really individual where she can really spell out niche situations with many niche lyrics and yet make it so universal that it's so relatable in a way as well. And I think that All Too Well just does that so exceptionally well. Like, the level of detail that she puts into that song, and then just to sum it all up with I Remember It All Too Well, such a simple but such a potent lyric, is so impressive. And those moments are like all across Red where she's able to do something like that. I think even on a song like Begin Again, which I absolutely love, the like imagery of I watched it begin again, as if she's watching the seasons turn, but she's really like watching herself let go of a relationship and being able to embrace another. Like, those kind of moments are exactly what makes Red and exactly what makes her songwriting going on. And it's just hit after hit after hit after hit on this album. I think the strike rate is so high. And for an album that is so diverse, it is such an enthralling listen from start to finish. And that's why it ends up at number 2 on my list, which leads us into our number 1, which you probably would have already guessed. It is Folklore.
But I knew you, playing hide and seek and giving me your weekends. I knew you, your heartbeat on the high line, once in 20 lifetimes.
Folklore to me is a perfect album. Like, it came at a point when I don't think anybody could have expected this kind of move from Taylor Swift. She'd just come off her flashiest, most all over the place album, most pop forward album. And I don't think that anyone could have seen her going intimate again and like going inside herself and giving us something that was so kind of raw after that moment. But that's exactly what she did. I feel like you can hear when the inspiration's running hot for Taylor Swift. And I was talking about it before with Evermore, where it just felt like the pen wouldn't stop writing. And that's the kind of feeling that you get on Folklore. I also feel like there's always been this like, there's always been a fairy tale nature to her songwriting, which I mentioned when I was talking about Fearless. And fiction is obviously something that she really enjoys. And I think positioning this album as fiction gave her a lot of freedom in terms of her songwriting, even though I don't believe that it's fiction. But I think that a story, there's always some truth to a fictional story. And I feel like she was able to create this kind of fairy tale almost that there was actually some real life within. And I feel like because of that, she was able to be more daring with her songwriting than ever. and more cutting. And I think that's the thing. Like, the songwriting on this is just so laid bare, and it begins with a song like The One, where I remember like gasping when I heard this for the first time, because I felt like she was talking about Joe, and it seemed to just spell out a breakup. But starting the album with "I'm doing good, I'm on some new shit" is just such a like refreshing beginning for her, and then she really gets into the weeds through the whole album. I'm just pulling up the track list because there's so much to talk about when it comes to Folklore for me. Like Cardigan, the nostalgia that she conjures with that song, where I knew you, playing hide and seek, like something about Levi jeans. I can't remember the exact lyrics, but like she's so nostalgic on that song. And then to go into something like The Last Great American Dynasty, where she manages to bring history into a song and still make it playful and fun, and also make a comment about women who are often described as too much, which is another theme that she ties into a song like Mad Woman. It's just exceptionally done, this album. And I feel like entering a fictional world is exactly what everybody wanted to do during COVID, but they were also really in their feels. And this album does an excellent job of being both escapist and extremely real at the same time. Like, the real moments on this album are totally devastating when you think of a song like August. I mean, August slipped away like a bottle of wine. The end of summer is already a very depressing moment for me in particular, but then to tie that into like a metaphor of a relationship as well really gets me. This Is Me Trying, the bridge of This Is Me Trying. It's hard to be at a party when you feel like an open wound is like some of Taylor Swift's best. So good. My Tears Ricochet, the way that she bounces together power and vulnerability when talking about, I think this is about the whole Scooter Braun situation, but it's just treated with such detail and such clarity of mind, which I am so impressed by. And even the songs that didn't strike me at first on this, there's a run that's like Illicit Affairs and Invisible String. They just get me so much now. And Invisible String is so good. There's a playfulness and a childlike nature even to the production on that one, which I think is so cool. And I think the production is such a major part of this album as well, and this world that she built, that nothing feels more cohesive than Folklore does. Like, she's never been able to build a sound, maybe 1989 with the pop sound, but she managed to craft something that just felt so uniquely her, and yet also something that we'd never heard from her at the same time, which I found almost like wondrous in a way. It felt like we were stepping into a children's book, but like a really heavy fucking children's book, because obviously I don't think half the themes on this, more than half the themes, you could put into a children's book, which I find so cool. Like, even a song like Hoax, which it finishes on, it gives me this feeling, and I don't know if it's because of like it's tied to that experience of listening to this during COVID, or whether it's just like the darkness that this conjures, but there's a fog that like hovers over that song, and actually a fog that hovers over this whole record in general, that I find just totally spine tingling, and just such an unexpected moment from one of the biggest pop stars who, as I said before, was maybe losing her footing, but then got everything back on track with a distinctively alternative record. You just don't see that kind of thing. And I think it's because people connect to Taylor Swift's songwriting so tightly and they hold on to it. And I think that this album really understood that that's the masterfulness of her artistry, is that kind of songwriting. And to be able to deliver that in a whole new setting and bring on a whole new legion of fans, and honestly just propel her career into a whole new level, is so incredible. Obviously, this album won Album of the Year at the Grammys. It was the third one of her albums to do that, and I think the most deserving of that award by far. Exceptional album, and my number one Taylor Swift album. I need to go away and drink a lot of water and take a deep breath, because that was a lot to get into, but I always love talking about her albums. There was so much to unpack here, so much worthy of being unpacked, and so much to get excited about a potential new Taylor Swift era, whatever that is going to bring. Obviously, I want to see your rankings. Obviously, I know that you're all going to have very different rankings to what I have, but if we share the same number 1 or 2 or 3, drop it in the comments below. Drop your full ranking in the comments below. Head on over to the Discord with me and we can talk about it further there as well. Don't forget to be following the Pop Pod if you're not already, or subscribe to it as well, and rate us 5 stars. Until next time, thank you so much for joining.